in terms of taxes, the obvious tax is the Wall Street sales tax, the Tobin tax, a 1% tax on all Wall Street turnover.
But instead, Wall Street has Herman Cain and all their other whores promoting a general new VAT or sales tax on us to pay them the money in bailouts.
It's a disaster. The value-added tax is an absolute disaster. These are regressive taxes. We don't need them. We need progressive taxes. But more than anything, more than taxes on any individual, tax Wall Street banks and financial institutions, because that's what is not taxed. Others can argue that they're taxed.
Yeah, that's the group that has a free hand to wreck the entire society. So listen, Webster, we're running out of time here. I've got to talk to you about the overall world financial crisis. That's where you're the real expert at. And then dovetail that with what is the leader of Iran, Ahmadinejad, what is he doing having the head of their Navy come out and say we're going to put ships off the U.S.? Sure, I get the tit for tat. There's U.S. and European ships all around them and right up in their face, in their grill, as the trendies would say today. But still, Iran has done well to not be provocative. Why would they want to give an entree into conflict?
Well, the great principle of international relations, of course, is reciprocity. And whatever you insist on doing to somebody else, eventually somebody else will do to you. So I would not recommend gestures of this kind. But on the other hand, you have to think about his domestic political audience and the idea to maybe knock these elites in the West a little bit off balance. Certainly, we see Chinese vessels now, warships in the Mediterranean, a couple of Iranian corvettes or frigates in the North Atlantic. Not going to make any military difference. It's largely symbolic, and I think largely for domestic consumption. So I don't think that's so outrageous.
So it's tough guy saber rattling because the Iranians are tired of the spy flights and the ships all around them. It's their military acting tough, a little bit of chest beating.
Yeah, I think today the announcement from Iran was that they've now got a cruise missile which has gone into mass production. So it's the other side of the coin is don't come into our nearby territorial waters or you're going to have trouble. But the big international crisis, of course, is we're now in the second wave of the Depression, right? 1929 was the first, 1931, the European banking crisis, the second, and then a U.S. banking panic in 1933 was the third. This time it's the Lehman Brothers crisis 3 years ago. That was the first wave. Now we're in the European banking panic. It's a banking panic. It's not a sovereign debt crisis or anything else. It's a crisis of the banks. And you can look at these banks, SocGen, Crédit Agricole, Barclays Bank, Deutsche Bank, and all the rest of them. These are the focus of the crisis. And what you have now is the inability of the European Commission, especially Barroso, the Portuguese politician coming from a fascist political background, the guy who gave the State of the European Union today. He wants Eurobonds. It's crazy. You can't bail out derivatives. There are too many derivatives. The European share of derivatives is at least $500 trillion of bankrupt, kited derivatives.
Well, Webster, you've been, in closing, you've been talking about this for a decade. We're talking 1.5 quadrillion. And no matter how many bailouts there are in Europe, as you have rightfully said, it's never going to fix it. Now the IMF needs one. Now they want this new, quote, economic union, and they openly say, get rid of what's left of European sovereignty. I've heard them on Bloomberg say the democracy of Germany is bad because they don't want to go along with it. I mean, they're so naked now. So where do you see this going?
Well, until you change policies, the depression gets worse and worse. And of course, the policies that would change something would be one of the things I said before, the Wall Street sales tax, the Tobin tax. There are people in Europe who want to have a Tobin tax, and that would be a good step, except you got to make sure the money goes to the national treasuries to maintain your social safety net. The other thing is you want to get a recovery, you got to attack the Federal Reserve, and here's how you do it. You got to force Bernanke, either by law or by leaning on him, by political pressure. Bernanke, you've been giving 0% credit to banks, to credit card companies, to everybody who's a financial speculator.
In some case, less than zero, Webster.
Gets, 0% or less in terms of credit. What the Fed would have to do to get a recovery is announce that they're going to buy $1 trillion of bonds from American states at a 0% coupon and 100-year maturity. So build some
exactly.
infrastructure.
Loan the fiat directly into the states and the people instead of to offshore constellations that loan it back at 30% interest.
Exactly. And this is now federal lending. We don't want to go.
But what I don't like about the fake right-wingers is they'll say corporate welfare, let the banks have $10 trillion in bailout or whatever, but then they'll sit there and talk about a welfare mom all day. You know, my issue is I don't want dependency. I want to put folks off welfare. I mean, I want them off of it. But the bigger issue is, how does Rush Limbaugh and all these guys promote this giant corporate largesse? Well, they of course get the news is they get paid for their views. In other words, not just the ads on those programs, but also the actual content of what they say is bought and paid for by various reactionary interests. But the question with the Federal Reserve is it's got to be nationalized. There's a tremendous credit-creating power that belongs to the American people, and we want it, and we want to use it. So start with $1 trillion, buy these 0% bonds from states, 100-year maturity, to build what? To rebuild the interstate highway system, to rebuild the entire rail system, passenger freight, and bridges, infrastructure that makes
electrical grid.
Instead, the globalist model. Instead, Webster, the globalist model is to slap toll roads on already taxpayer-paid-for existing roads and call it free market. That's not free market. It's robbery.
Then you better factor in the expense of learning Chinese, because that's who's going to be giving you orders. So you got to rebuild your infrastructure. And again, public buildings, schools, hospitals, absolutely. Water projects, a huge question, especially in the arid areas of the West, right? So you wouldn't have such a drought in Texas if you had adequate irrigation facilities. So $1 trillion, and that can go either to states or to something like, the Port Authority of New York, New Jersey.
Well, it has been proven that infrastructure projects it's one of the only government things that actually does something, creates a chain reaction in wealth in the areas it's built.
Right, and the contracts go to the private sector. In other words, the federal government, the Fed, the nationalized Fed, or partly nationalized anyway, nationalized enough to give out $1 trillion for these things. The money goes to the states. The states then make sure that it goes into infrastructure and only infrastructure. Those are capital goods. So that means you're increasing your capital goods stock and you're increasing the productivity of labor. And that's how you get a multiplier. You can't start with consumer spending. You got to start with
buying more Chinese slave baubles isn't going to get us out of this mess. But Webster, here's my final point. Those that watch this and criticize you as a socialist or something, they don't understand from your
American system.
No. This is American system. But let me stop you. How can they then support 16, 25, whatever, the numbers are different, trillion in banker bailouts that went nowhere, when infrastructure would actually go to the people in the building of it and then the use of it and then the maintaining of it? There's no debate. In closing, Vladimir Putin, before I even heard he got a facelift, boom, so you can see the facelift. He's coming back. Medvedev, his little minion, is agreeing with it. I always saw that as a fake ruse. You thought there was a split there. 1 minute on Vladimir Putin and what's happening in Russia.
I think the fact that Putin is coming back as president is one of the best things that's happened all year. And not only do we get Putin again as a strong leader for Russia, we get Putin minus Kudrin. Because Putin, he was able to engineer this. He basically played Kudrin, the finance minister, against Medvedev. Kudrin thought that he was going to become the next prime minister, that Medvedev would be dumped completely. Now, therefore, it's a masterpiece by Putin to play these one against the other and get rid of Kudrin. So now we have, in many ways, the best of all possible worlds, at least for the moment in Russia, that you have Putin and no Kudrin. You look at the American press, look at the Washington Post, look at the Wall Street Journal. They're apoplectic. They can't stand it. When the financier newspapers...
No, I know the New World Order doesn't like Putin. I'm still creeped out by a Russian strongman. I mean, my only issue is... why can't Russia ever have a real election, have a new leader? Or are you saying they want Putin for life?
Putin is the most popular candidate, and based on a democratic election, Putin is gonna win it. The power of Medvedev was simply foreign support, the overwhelming support of the IMF, of the U.S., the Federal Reserve, the European Central Bank. Europe.
And did Putin let them put in Medvedev as kind of a scam to go ahead and get the foreign investment that's been double-crossed that?
Part of it is this question of the Constitution, right? That you're not allowed to have more than 2 terms in a row.
So Putin thought, put a weakling in for a few years and folks will wish for me again.
Right. Let's take an example. If we had had Putin in power this year, I don't think the Libyan war would have happened because Putin would have vetoed it. It was the weakness of Medvedev, as pointed out by Russian Ambassador Chamov to Libya. What Medvedev did was really a betrayal of Russian national interest by supporting this crazy attack on Libya. Medvedev even said, we'll send peacekeeping troops. This is absolutely crazy. You can't get anywhere by betraying your allies.
So where does the effeminate Medvedev go now?
Oh, he'll be prime minister, and well, he may be prime minister, and that's that's maybe unavoidable. The one thing, I was talking to a well-informed Russian yesterday, and she said the danger now is the transition period between now, where it's clear what the plan is, and the actual election and inauguration. They're expecting attempts to destabilize the country. In other words, the U.S. and the British are going to say, my God, if Putin makes a comeback, we'll never have a color revolution. We can't do our CIA people power coup. Let's rev up the Chechens. Let's rev up some terrorism.
They'll start having jihadis blow the hell out of Russia.
Something like this, yes.
All right, Webster, we got to leave it there.
The other one is also just Serbia, right? Notice there's a big shooting incident today on the border of Serbia and this Kosovo criminal enterprise. That's also that's the beginning of a destabilization.
Well, you're being an extremist, not saying the jihadis are great people. It's good that Al-Qaeda has been given Libya. According to our media, and I support our mainstream media, Webster, it's very evil that you're anti-Al-Qaeda. Tarpley.net.
Incorrigible.
Webster, thanks for talking to us.
Thank you always, Alex.
Well, it's clear. We're beta testing INFOWARS Nightly News. It's going to end up being an hour long. I think it's just a stated fact that I love information. I love our guest. I love our crew. I love the fact that my crew always overproduces news packages and information. And so the show is always about an hour long. And so I'm going to leave it at that. Now, we'll see if tomorrow night I can do 30 minutes, but I'm sure we'll fail. And at the end of the day, I think you're happy. It's unscripted. It's teleprompter free. I'm Alex Jones signing off for INFOWARS Nightly News. We got some big reports tomorrow and Friday. We couldn't do it without you. Subscribe to PrisonPlanet.tv or buy your friends and family memberships if you believe in the type of information, the real out-of-the-box thinking you're seeing here. I, for one, am proud to be associated with this operation and associated with you. We'll see you back tomorrow night, God willing.